welcome back to Word on Wednesday. So glad that you could join us. Today got a couple of great special guests. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
I'm Lyn.
And I'm Geri.
These are the Kruckenbergs, two of our amazing elders here at the church. And so thankful that you guys could come and hang out with me to be a part of this today. We're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. So I'm going to read this, and then we can have a little bit of a conversation. How's that sound?
Good.
Awesome. Here we go. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of the religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah. For a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house, and they saw the child and his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chest, and they gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. So this is such a well-known story. You know, we, especially around Christmas time, we have all kinds of movies. You know, I remember back when I was a kid, there was a great California Raisins Christmas cartoon that they did, and it had the wise men in it. Do you remember seeing that? It was so much fun. So this is a story, you know, the three gifts, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Like, this is something that a lot of people know about. As we read through these verses, what jumps out at you? What stands out to you the most?
Oh, just that Herod was insecure about hearing about the king of the Jews, and it's like, okay, even though that was a baby, you know, he's going to be dethroned by this king.
Yeah. So what did Herod's insecurity do to him? When we feel insecure, what does that tend to do to us emotionally and mentally?
Oh, just be fearful and just make wrong decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what it says there in my translation. It says that he was troubled, but beyond that Jerusalem was troubled with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's the part that kind of stood. Why would Jerusalem be troubled?
Sure. Well, I think that troubling might refer to more than just a negative anxiety, but I think it's more of a stirring up.
Okay.
You know, at this point, the people of Israel have been waiting for hundreds of years for their Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
And really, during the last probably 150 years, the nation of Israel, they had really begun to believe that their Messiah would come in any moment.
Yeah.
But their view of a Messiah was more of a conquering king. They were expecting somebody to rise to power who was going to reestablish the kingdom of David. So he was going to be a warrior. He was going to be mighty and powerful. And the nation of Israel was going to be restored to its glory like it was under King Solomon. And so if you're Herod and you got into political power through political maneuvering, well, that starts making you a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
Because you think, somebody's going to come here who's going to be more powerful than me, and he's actually going to get rid of me and set up his own base of power.
That's right.
You know, how many times do people make decisions based on what's best for them instead of what's actually best for other people?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we see that happening here.
Yeah. Yeah. Herod wasn't a true leader, because true leaders will go ahead and do what's best for the people and for others rather than for themselves.
Absolutely. That's the heart of servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Lynn, what's something that stands out to you from this passage?
Well, it's difficult. Knowing what the story is, it's difficult not to think ahead about also what's coming. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me is, as we're reading this, knowing that in the future that Herod was going to command that the babies be killed.
Yeah.
It's like, how in the wide world of sports did he have the nerve to think that he was going to overcome what God had in mind?
True.
Well, that's a great question. And in our Set Free class, as part of our growth track, this is one of the things that we talk about, that Lucifer, who became Satan, is the most self-deceived individual in the world. And anytime that spirit of the enemy is in operation, it causes a person to become deceived to where they feel like they're invincible, that nothing could ever kill them, that nothing could ever touch them. And so just as Satan is continuing to fight against God himself, thinking that he's somehow going to be victorious, well, here Herod is. And what we know from history is that Herod himself was not Jewish. He had married a Jewish woman. Mm-hmm. And so his family line had been able to establish themselves politically in Israel, and then he had arisen to this place of becoming the king. Now that was an appointment by the Romans, so he was able to actually be more friendly with the Romans than he was with the Jewish people. So we had this very tenuous relationship. But he didn't really care anything about God. Mm-hmm. All he cared about was his own position and his own power. If you watch the movie The Nativity, it's a great movie because it's very historically accurate. They actually show Herod at Masada, which was located a little ways away from Jerusalem. And Masada became a place where Herod was actually building his own resort or his own place of escape to be able to go to. And he was spending, in today's dollars, billions and billions of dollars just on this private place of luxury and relaxation. And he built pools and steam rooms and baths and all of these things for himself to be able to enjoy, and he wasn't even there very often. But it just shows that he was so narcissistic and self-focused.
Yep.
Jerry, what else stands out to you from this passage?
Just, of course, obviously foretelling Jesus is coming and the future with him being the Messiah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so cool to me that these prophecies like this, O you Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least of the ruling cities, because a ruler will come from you to be the shepherd of my people. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, the city of Bethlehem, well, this is David's hometown. Yeah. Well, David was what before he was a king?
Shepherd.
He was a shepherd. So Bethlehem was really associated with shepherds. But shepherds are actually the lowest rung on society during this time. These were not people that were looked at as, high class. These would have been your very much blue collar workers, right? They were not popular as far as people went. And yet God always seems to choose to work in unexpected ways. Mm-hmm. God doesn't use the most qualified. He qualifies those who are willing to be able to work and to serve. The other thing I love is that this is a prophecy that had come out hundreds and hundreds of years before this. Mm-hmm. So the fact that Jesus fulfilled this, like you said, it just points that much more to him being the Messiah. I think an interesting thing about this passage is how we usually try to incorporate this into the Christmas story. And that makes sense, right? Because we don't actually know when these wise men showed up.
That's right.
But realistically, this could have been anywhere up to 2 years after Jesus was actually born. Mm-hmm. It says that they were in a house, so we know that they've now moved from the stable and now they're actually living in a home or in a dwelling. So some time has passed. This is not the night that Jesus was born that these 3 wise men show up and offer their gifts. So what comes to your mind? What do you think was going on in the minds and the hearts of these 3 wise men? I mean, these guys, they were from the east, most likely from Persia. And if you think about it, this makes sense that they would have had a connection to the Jewish people, because when Israel had been conquered by the Babylonians in 587 BC, well, the next group that really took control of Israel were the Persians, because they conquered the Babylonian Empire. So the Persians take over, and then you have someone like Daniel who rises up through the ranks and becomes one of the top leaders under the Persian king. And so the Persians, they would have had a lot of interaction with the Jewish people. They would have known their law. They would have been able to read their scriptures and known their prophets. And so it makes sense that they would have been anticipating this king of the Jews. This would not have taken them by surprise. They would have had a lot of familiarity with the Jewish people. So when these non-Jewish, non-God-fearing individuals in Persia, they see this star and they're willing to travel all this way to see this king, what do you think was going on inside of their hearts?
That one's a difficult one to imagine.
Yeah.
To have that level of that's the word I'm groping for,
Expectation.
dedication.
Yeah.
That might be one of the words that I would use, because we're not talking about an easy travel.
No.
We know that they didn't have the interstate system that we have,
Right.
or the airports or any of those kinds of things. That it was all either on foot or by some beast of burden, whether it be camel, horse, whatever it was. The other part of that is the preparation for that trip must have been just absolutely unbelievable, because they would have taken a whole entourage.
Right.
And the wise men in our society are portrayed as, here's this little box of whatever this treasure is, whether it be gold or franc. No, I can't imagine that would be a present fit for a king.
Right.
It would have been chests and a whole entourage.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been any simple little, okay, here we go, and 20 minutes later we're there.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're probably talking 30, 40 people.
Minimum.
And in today's dollars, probably millions of dollars in travel expenses.
Yep.
And that, Lynn, you just said something that really speaks to my heart. These were not believers, but they were interested, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their hearts were open to the truth of God. And I think that anybody that's watching this video or anybody that's reading this passage, one of the things that this speaks to me is God he'll speak to people wherever they're at.
Yeah.
That's right.
So God revealed himself to these individuals that were asking questions. I have friends in my life that aren't yet Christians, but I know that there's a curiosity there. There's a desire there to understand the truth about God. And the example that I think that we can learn from these wise men is that if we, in that desire to get to know God better, are willing to go to some great lengths, if we're willing to put in the effort, we're willing to put in the energy, we'll get to see God.
Yeah.
I mean, these were some of the first individuals that had the privilege of recognizing Jesus for who he was.
That's right.
I mean, a lot of people got to see Jesus the baby. His mom's carrying him around. They're excited. There's joy around a new baby. But these three men were some of the, we don't even know how many there were. There may have been dozens. But these individuals were some of the first to be able to know who he actually was.
That's right.
And these weren't even Jews. So that speaks so much to me, because I came to God not from a place of a religious background, but I came to God as a young person. I was just curious about who he was. And then I was willing to start going to church and started reading the Bible, and I started asking questions, and I started putting myself around people that had good information about God, and slowly I began to get this picture and understanding of who God is. And I think what this says to me is that anybody who's willing to put in that time and the energy, God is more than happy to reveal himself to them.
Well, the scripture tells us that on the way anyway, because it says that those who seek him, he rewards them.
That's right.
And that reward, I think, is, we so often think of, okay, here's this pile of cash or what have you,
Yeah.
but that's not what he's referring to. He's talking about his presence.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
That's right. And there's nothing greater than that, right?
That's
Mhm.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
And these wise men, they got it. I mean, they're called wise men for a reason. I mean, that's the translation here. There's other terms that could have been associated with them. Some even call them magi or magicians. These were studied scholars that were considered, to be experts in all kinds of the ancient arts at that time. But they understood what it meant to put everything on the line, to be able to go and to stand in the presence of greatness. And there's a lot of people that wouldn't be willing to do that today.
That's right. That's right.
And the other thing that they did was Herod, who was the king, and really who had the power, he could have arrested them, he could have even had them killed if he wanted to. They made a decision not to align themselves with the power of the day, but rather to align themselves with what God wanted for them and what was going to be best in the situation.
Yeah, that's right.
Anything else that stands out to you guys from this passage?
Oh, just that they would have awe and wonder and expectation going there. Because, like you guys were saying, it's not an easy trek and that kind of thing. So the excitement and awe would be building up. You know, we're going to see the king.
Yeah.
So
That's absolutely right. Well, I love that they were guided by a star. Now, we don't know astrologically what this was. If it was sometimes they'll show it was like a combining of multiple stars or planetary systems, whatever it was. We know that God physically intervened in the universe to create some kind of light in the sky that led these individuals to where Jesus was. And we don't know, how that they were studying that or what tools they were using, but what we do know is that it led them right to where Jesus was at. And again, if we open our hearts up to desiring to know God and we're willing to seek Him, like you said, He will lead us and He will guide us. And you know what? Sometimes He's going to use the Holy Spirit, especially for those of us who actually have a relationship. Yep. But for non-believers, God uses all kinds of stars to get people to where He wants them to go. He'll use individuals, He'll use circumstances and situations to guide and to direct our lives. And if our hearts are open to Him, God will get us to the place where we're able to be with Him where He is.
That's right.
Have you ever had an experience like that where God used something to direct you to Himself?
I think the first time I was in college, I grew up in a denominational church and was searching I knew there was something more. And God sent me 2 different individuals to tell me about the Lord. And I went from different church to different church. And then finally just was saved in Vestavia Apartments that the Holy Spirit just said, there can't be, it's got to be you, Lord, that saves me rather than being on this narrow path that I'm afraid I'm going to fall off of.
Yeah.
And so just by myself in Vestavia Apartments, 19 got saved.
That's awesome. How about you, Lynn? Have you looking back on your life, do you see any points where God was using external things to direct you to Him?
Oh, yeah. Probably along the same vein as Jerry's. As I was 17 in a Christian Bible camp one summer, and I'd been going to church since I was a baby, literally, but I'd never understood grace.
Okay.
And Jack Hayford was one of the speakers that summer. And he was the one that explained that I was not on a spiritual tightrope.
Wow.
Yep.
And what a great person to be able to hear that message from. Jack Hayford was amazing.
Yeah.
In my life, I laugh about this now, but I was a girl crazy teenager, and I tell people I chased a blonde into church, and I ended up getting saved as a result of it. And that wasn't on my radar, because that was not my motivation for going to church, right? I was trying to impress her, right? God was not part of that for me, and ultimately ended up getting saved. And the youth pastor, it was amazing how God did this. The youth pastor whose youth ministry I came to know the Lord through, he lived a block away from me. And so for 2 years, I would go over to his house 3 and 4 days a week, and God bless him and his wife for putting up with me all that time. They had 2 young children, but yet they were always opening their home up to me, and they would answer my questions. And I was just so hungry because it was something new that I had never really experienced before. And I can think back on so many different places in my life where God used people and events to get me closer and closer to that point where I was ready to be saved. And sometimes, just like the difficulty and the danger of traveling a long distance, or the personal exertion that went into that with their own money and things, sometimes the things that led me to Jesus weren't enjoyable. Yeah. There were some painful things that got me to that place where I was open to receiving Him. But ultimately, the moment I got there, it was the best thing in the world.
Oh, you bet.
How you got there didn't matter anymore, did it?
That's right. It's kind of like, well, I've never experienced this myself, but you can speak to this. Like a mother, in the process of giving birth, there's a lot of pain. But once that baby comes, everything, all that doesn't even matter.
It didn't matter.
Right. You're willing to do it again.
No, that's right.
So the last thing I kind of want to focus on here is the gifts that they gave to him. Now we understand that these gifts were very symbolic. You know, the gold, that's kingship, that's wealth and value, and you know, the frankincense, it had all kinds of value as far as like the sacrificial system goes, and things of that nature, and the worship of God, because it was used in the way that they worshipped him, the way that they prepared their offerings. And then the myrrh, you know, it was a representation of the type of death that Jesus was going to die.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was something that was often used in like pain medication, or it was made part of sacrifices. And Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice. So even then, you know, they were giving these gifts. Now we don't know if they gave these gifts with that intentionality exactly, or if God was directing them to give them symbolically. But we can see the significance in that now. You know, but obviously gold, frankincense, and myrrh aren't normal parts of our culture today. They're not things in our, you know, that we have laying around, or things that we would necessarily think to buy. What do you think are some of the sacrificial gifts that we can offer to our King whenever we desire to stand before him and give our hearts over to Jesus?
Our time.
Our time. That's huge, especially today.
Yeah, because we can never get that back.
That's right. That's a great example. What do you think, Lynn?
Our service.
Our service? In what ways can we serve the Lord?
Oh, God. There is really not any single way. There's a whole multitude of ways, whether it's service in the church itself, there's a myriad of things to do, or in the community. Yeah. In anything that reveals who Jesus is an act of service.
I love how you said that. Anything that reveals who Jesus is, that making God known. That's great. What else? What are some sacrificial gifts that we can offer the Lord?
Our money, you know, with tithing and offerings and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Can you think of anything else? You can't let her beat you.
I'm not sure if she kind of touched on it or said it earlier, but ourselves.
Yeah.
That's the biggest gift that he would like.
Yep. And that's really all that he wants from us.
That's right.
Is he wants our heart.
That's right.
You know, anything that's going to tie us more closely to him, not because he wants to control us, but because he desires to have that relationship. You know, and ultimately, again, it says that when it was time to leave, that they went home by another route because God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. It matters that we're obedient.
That's right.
To whenever the Lord speaks to us. And we've talked about this before, but God speaks to us in different ways. Sometimes it's going to be through a dream, but most of the time it's just going to be through that still small voice in our heart, or that idea that comes into our mind, and we don't want to just be dismissive of that. Or whenever we're reading the Word and something jumps out at us and the Holy Spirit kind of pricks our heart and says, you need to pay attention to this. We need to pay attention to it. Because what would have happened if they would have gone back to Herod? What do you think might have occurred if that would have gone on?
I suspect he would have killed him.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want him spreading that message.
Absolutely. It would have not only affected their lives, but it would have greatly complicated Mary and Joseph's lives.
Yeah, Herod would have had the wise men bring him back to Jesus and, you know, kill him or just whatever.
Yeah. So we see God moving behind the scenes.
Yep.
You know, and sometimes it's in big ways, sometimes it's in little ways, but God is always working toward good. Yeah. But one of the things that I think is also important that we understand here is there is an enemy.
Yeah.
You know, God had a plan, but God was working his plan in and out, weaving it throughout the reality that existed in that time. So God could have just said, you know what, I'm going to have my son be born, and he's going to be born in this big miraculous way, and everybody's just going to rush to him and worship him. But that's not the way God does things. Nope. God does things in ways that don't make sense to the rest of the world. But I believe it's because he wants us to come to him out of the desire of our own heart, right, not because we're forced to do so. And I think this is just a really good reminder to us that God works in the midst of the mess. God works in the midst of the foreign leaders or the world leaders and the pain and the suffering and the tragedies and the difficulties of life. He works through all of those things because he's big enough to, because we live in a fallen and broken world,
Yes, we do.
that he's still able to accomplish his purposes and plans no matter what's going on around us.
Yeah. Well, those evil leaders, in a portion of the Bible, it says that he does have appointed them, or that he allows them to be there.
Yeah.
So he's bigger, like you just said, to deal with all this and work in through it.
Absolutely.
And we so often look at a circumstance that, for instance, the founding of the nation of Israel. We had a big discussion. I hope this isn't too far off topic, but we had a big discussion one time with a non-believer. And he said, well, the reason that the Jewish state exists is because all you Bible believers and readers saw where this happened, you made it happen. And I just looked at me and said, does it really matter how it happened? God said it was going to happen. Therefore, it did, whatever means he used to accomplish his goal.
That's right. Well, and you look at one of the primary means was the Holocaust. That's not something we would have wanted for anybody.
That's
7 million Jews passed away, but God used something tragic. Now, God didn't cause the tragedy,
That's right.
but God used the tragedy to bring about something good. And we just need to remind ourselves, just like from this story, again, that if we are willing to pursue God, he will guide and direct our steps, whether it be through a star in the heavens or through events and circumstances. He will get us to the place where we are in front of Jesus, and then it's up to us what we're willing to offer to Jesus and if we're willing to be obedient to what God says to us.
That's right.
So, well, guys, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking some time to be here and chat about this passage with me today. If this has been a blessing to you, we want to encourage you guys to share this on Facebook so that other people can be a part of it. Leave a comment. Let us know what God is speaking to you through his word. And we hope that you'll join us next week for Word on Wednesday. God bless you.